Hello everybody, good evening. My name is Ian Andrews. I'm the Executive Director at Lakewood Alive. We're Lakewood's nonprofit community development organization. Thank you for being here tonight, especially on a chilly night. We appreciate you coming out to talk about a really important topic that seems to become more and more important with every passing day. As Lakewood's CDC, our mission is to foster and sustain vibrant neighborhoods. A central part of a vibrant neighborhood are healthy people, and that's not just for adults. We need to think about our children, teens and adolescents, and our even younger kids and what they're experiencing. So we want to make sure that our families, our community, our neighborhoods are strong and are healthy. That's easier said than done. So we're excited to have this conversation tonight. A tough one to meet, but we appreciate that you're here. I also want to acknowledge our elected official in the room, Mayor Michael Summers. Thank you, Mayor, for being here this evening. We appreciate your support. Also, Human Service Director Tony Gelsomino, she and her team, we work very closely. Many of you may or may not know the housing outreach side of what we do. We don't just put on Light Up Lakewood, which is coming up, or the big events or the Merchant Association, or trying to connect businesses to vacant spaces. We're working directly with folks, primarily low to moderate income people, to make sure they live in healthy and safe conditions. We have a ton of emphasis in Birdtown, in Ward 4, and there's some wonderful people that we work with who are struggling. And so we work so closely with Tony, and we appreciate the partnership and the partnership from the mayor as well. So also thanks to Lakewood City Schools. They are a fantastic host. They're wonderful to partner with. I appreciate the forums are put on by our Community Forum Committee, which is chaired by Cindy Einhaus. Cindy is in the back, so Cindy, thank you very much. And Cindy Friedman is back there as well. She's a member of our committee, longtime Lakewood resident, owns a business here in town. And then also to our friends at the Lakewood Community Relations Commission with the City of Lakewood. Thank you very much. They have been a great partner in bringing attention to some serious issues that we want to talk about. So that's enough for me. I'm going to stop. I'm going to introduce our moderator, Dr. Molly Leviscus. She is a rock star in this field. We're really excited that she's going to be here, and she's going to introduce her.
Thank you everyone for being here. I see some faces I know, some faces I don't know, but I appreciate so much that everyone's turned out tonight to talk about something that we all care deeply about, which is the wellness of our youth in Lakewood and beyond. Today with us we have a wonderful panel, but I'd like to introduce them first by name and then have them very briefly introduce themselves. So we have Jason Lambrisi, who's a doctor at the Cleveland Clinic. We have Roberta Marcinek, who's one of our school counselors at Lakewood High School. Oh, I should also mention that I work closely with Roberta and our next panelist, Nina DeChamp, because we do have a clinic here in the Lakewood High School. Then we have Colleen McNamara, who's with the City of Lakewood Division of Youth. And at the end we have Courtney Noster, who's LPCC, or a clinical counselor who works for the Healthy Lakewood Foundation. Jason, would you mind starting with
Jason? I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I work at the Cleveland Clinic, and I'm based currently at the Lakewood Family Health Center, shared with the new Cleveland Clinic building over in Detroit. And so I'm there working with youth, primarily under age 18, for any sort of general mental health needs, as well as with our Center for LGBT Care, where I work with our LGBT youth there as well.
Hi, I'm Roberta Marcinek, and I'm a counselor here at Lakewood High School, and I'm working with students anywhere from 9th to 12th grade. I do have a background in elementary counseling for many years here in Lakewood, along with teaching.
Hi everyone, my name is Nina DeChamp, and I am the 9th grade school counselor here at Lakewood High School. I've been at the high school for approximately 8 years. Within the last 3 years, they designated me to focus on the 9th grade population, being that the 9th graders have a very tough transition from at times going from middle school to high school, so that's my focus.
Hello, I'm Colleen McNamara, and I'm the manager for family services at the city's Division of Youth. I manage a program funded by the county to support families in the community, both in Lakewood and some of our surrounding suburban communities, as well as in the neighborhoods. We have a small team of social workers who support families in the community. We do a lot of joining and convening of helpers around family issues to support and decrease the stress that families are experiencing. The Division of Youth has been in existence. They're supporting families for close to 40 years, and been there for about 18, so.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Courtney Noster, and as Molly mentioned, I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor. Most recently have done work with Lakewood Centers as a community-based counselor, providing therapeutic services in families' homes, including here in the Lakewood area. I'm in the transition to private practice to continue my work as an early childhood mental health therapist.
Thank you. I want to make sure you guys understand the flow of the evening. We're going to have our discussion, and it'll be kind of informal, kind of some dialogue back and forth, and then at the end we'll have time for questions. So I believe everyone has cards. Is that right? Do you all have cards? Okay, so you can write questions down as they come to you, and then at the end, the Lakewood Alive team will help collect that and then facilitate getting those questions up here, and we'll try to answer them in the order they came. If we don't get to your question tonight, or within the time limit, because we only have 1 hour to cover a whole lot of information, that's very useful, I hope, to everybody, then we'll be up here for a while, so you can come and ask questions. So, I'd also like to draw your attention to two of the handouts that were on the back table. One's Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, and I'm going to frame our discussion tonight using that article. I hope that you find time to read it, or at least listen to it on a podcast, and think about it, because I think your city, I think the city of Lakewood is a very unique place, and I hope that we can shine a spotlight on some of the things that are being done remarkably well here. And this article frames that, particularly thinking about the relationship between the generations and the wellness that can be found in a community as far as health benefits when we have those social bonds. The other piece is called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, and How to Listen So Kids Will Talk, and it's by Elaine Faber, one of her colleagues. There is a book with this title. It's a nice book. It's very fast and there's pictures in it, but this 8-page document is like the quick and easy, and it really helps. I love to read it to remind myself of how to communicate with kids. Remember when I do it right, because you need to remember that we can do this, we're good enough to do this, we're capable of doing this, and also recognize when we may be struggling in certain ways and some things that we could do better when we're communicating with our youth. So to begin, again, we have a lot to cover. Some of the things that I hope you leave with today are an understanding of what is mental illness and what is mental health. Mental health is this big. Normal or typical is this big. And if people are having bumps in their road or challenges, fluctuations in their mood, it doesn't necessarily mean it's an illness. Illness is kind of small out here on the ends. And so we want to keep that in mind as we help our youth, and not necessarily over-identify illness, but help them lean into their stress, lean into their anxiety, and get through it to build their resiliency. And as the adults in the world surrounding youth, when we communicate on that, we can help build and empower that. The other thing I want to mention, and the panelists are going to mention in more detail, is the impacts of our environment that can cause stress and sometimes exacerbate illness, and also what is genetic and biological, and how those things overlap. I also want to make sure we emphasize that there are many ways to treat challenges in our medical world, and I'm a medical doctor. In our medical world, we try to chip away at the illness, but we may forget to empower the balloon that lifts us up. And those are all sorts of things that are far beyond the medical clinic and the medical model. And that's where the community and the response from families, from schools, from all sorts of other protective factors come in. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that equilibrium and how we can all do a better job to empower our youth and strengthen their resiliency. Finally, mental illness is indiscriminate. So it may affect people who've had significant stressors in their life in a different way, but just because you have multiple stressors, or what we call toxic stress or adverse life experiences, that doesn't mean we're going to have mental illness. And just because we haven't had those things doesn't mean we're not going to struggle with mental illness. So I want to make sure we emphasize that. Final point is it's okay to talk about it. And in fact, all the research shows that when we talk about it, when we reduce stigma, we can see a lot of growth and healing. All right. So to begin, Courtney and Jason, maybe you can take this question, which I know is kind of a question out there in our contemporary literature media. Can you explain what is toxic stress, what it looks like, and how it's changed over the years?
I think a good place to start with this conversation is that there's lots of names we may hear for toxic stress. I think trauma being something that is pretty synonymous with toxic stress. So if we want to get really broad and think about it from that wide lens, anything that's emotional, physical, physiological, psychological, any of that residue that's left over from heightened levels of toxic stress, so that, you know, might come from experiences of danger, violence, significant loss, or any situation in which somebody may feel that their life is being threatened. And toxic stress is, again, that residue that's left over from those experiences.
Adverse childhood experiences that people have, sort of the more at risk they are later on in life of developing some sort of mental illness. But that also doesn't necessarily mean it's a sort of final decision or recipe. That's something that is going to happen to someone. There's certainly more sort of, people will undergo sort of normal kinds of life stresses, and we all undergo stress, and certainly stress is what makes us stronger and helps us build that resilience to be able to sort of weather storms in the future. But the more sort of deeply sort of rooted, difficult situations, like we're talking about sort of the facing of danger, of abuse or traumas, can certainly raise somebody's risk, but it's helpful for us when we're seeing kids at a young age. We can't intervene to not always have somebody sort of go down the path of developing sort of more serious conditions. But those sort of, unfortunately, some of those sort of ingredients may be there, maybe out of the control of the young person.
In the classroom or in the school environment, how does anxiety and depression present with the students? And what do you see, what do you look for? Can you help share that information with this community?
Yeah, sometimes it will present by a student shutting down or maybe like acting out in the classroom setting. Maybe they're not becoming engaged in the class discussions as, and maybe they're getting that feeling like, oh, I can't do the homework, and kind of like, I might guess wrong, or things like that.
One of the trends that I see specifically with ninth graders, and I'm going to kind of gear my talks towards what I'm seeing the most, which is the ninth graders, is the, I don't want to say a full-blown panic attack where they're not capable of functioning, but in their own mind, they're perceiving themselves as not capable of staying within the classroom setting. That would present as crying, thoughts of people looking at them. They're having thoughts of not being good enough, I can't handle this. And it is really, in my experience, the kids that are coming down with anxiety are generally overwhelmed by the pressure, whether it's real or not, of the academics that they're faced with every day. And the other thing I want to add is that it's also very different how anxiety is presented with a girl compared to a boy. And that's probably just based on the comfort level of boys versus girls coming down to see a female counselor. They're not as comfortable for whatever reason. Of course, we're always open to anybody coming down to talk with us about anxiety, but it does present differently with boys and girls from my perspective.
How does that affect, or what might parents see at home regarding school performance and homework in response to homework that would trigger communicating with you? And do you want parents to communicate with you about these things if they're seeing symptoms at home?
Well, so how it's presented at home, and this is generalized, everybody's an individual. I see a lot of the students that don't want to come to school. So school avoidance, in my opinion, is number one. Whether they're admitting that they are anxious about coming to school where they're finding excuses, whether they're sick, I've got a stomach ache, I don't feel well. They may not want to come right out and say, you know, I'm really overwhelmed with my algebra test this week. And some students are very vocal about not wanting to come to school and will refuse to come to school. So we have a lot of that going on, and the communication is key with parents contacting us and letting us know what's going on so that we can work with the child and to help them along with whatever fear they're facing or a stressor. We're really trying to let them know that we're there for them, and we'll do whatever we can in our power to ease their anxiety and help them understand what their triggers are when they're in the school setting.
Thank you. And you do that, and when the counselors are aware that the kids are struggling, it may not be as evident in the school setting, but the counselors have many tools to help lessen some of the stress when they are informed of that, and parents can come and inform the counselors themselves. I want to emphasize what Nina said about mental health problems presenting differently in the genders. Certainly we know with males, oftentimes depression as an adolescent can look like anger and frustration, and so that's important to remember. Thank you for bringing that up. Jason, can you talk about some of the warning signs that a child might be suffering with anxiety and depression, and how parents, adults in the world should respond to that?
Sure, it's really not one sort of easy answer to this, because this can really sort of show up in a whole lot of ways. But certain things that I look for that I think can be sort of clues or red flags is really sort of a change in their behavior. Like, you know your kids really well, and if you're noticing something isn't sort of right anymore, something isn't adding up, that could be sign of something going on. What that is, we have to figure out. But sort of there's a change in behavior. Maybe they're pulling back or withdrawing more, where they're not really wanting to talk to anyone. Not every teenager wants to talk to their parents, but when we start seeing withdrawal from the family in general, from their friends, but they really sort of don't want to have those social interactions anymore, that can often be a sign maybe there's something a bit more going on. We look for some changes in their mood. For some people, they can become more sad, and they're crying more often, or crying out of nowhere. Or we see that sort of anger, or even irritability, sort of grumpiness, like much more so than usual. Again, we all sort of have our sad days and our angry days and our irritable days. So it's not just sort of those moments that we all have, which would sort of be normal, it wouldn't be a mental illness. So when we start seeing it happen day after day after day, where this sort of happens over time, and often without a trigger. So sometimes something stressful will happen that may make us sad or angry. When we start seeing these mood changes without clear triggers, that happen for a long time, we feel like we're walking more on eggshells around them. Maybe we feel like their irritability is so bad, they're just bound to sort of have an anger outburst when we're walking on eggshells. That can be a clue as well. We're seeing maybe get more frustrated more quickly. So little things that should make us all a little bit annoyed make someone super duper angry. We sort of see that not sort of being proportional there. So I often sort of see that people not tolerating sort of frustrations as much as they were able to before. Those can often be sort of in and of themselves, not clear signs, but sort of those are the red flags I look for to see then how is this affecting their life. So we're also looking for not just some of these changes, but I really get concerned when things start getting in the way more. So is it getting in the way of their school attendance? Is it getting in their school performance? Kids who are traditionally really good students, whose grades are starting to take ahead. Are they not wanting to do sports anymore, do theater or the fun activities they like to do? So when we start really seeing it sort of affect their day-to-day life, that's often a sign that we want to sort of do something. The question is sort of, what is that something? Yes, I'm thinking of somebody who's showing these signs, or I'm seeing this happen in my life, what do I do with that information? I think there's some really great first line sort of folks to talk to. So the first one would be the kid. Let's try to have that open, honest dialogue with them about what's going on. But when we want to sort of talk to somebody else outside the family, I think sort of key people to think about, one would be the school. So being in touch with the teachers or the school guidance counselor. I'm often asking families, who do you have a relationship with at school? If you don't really know the guidance counselor, if you have a teacher you're really close to, or there's a mentor in school, reach out to that person. Folks often ask me, how much should I let the school know what's going on? This is personal, I want to keep this at home. I'd say that's fine, but I think letting the school know something is going on, because they're probably seeing something there, and if there's some explanation of what's going on, that would really help them in the school environment. So reaching out to the school, hearing about how the young person's doing at school and if they have any resources. The other person is the pediatrician. So reaching out to the primary care provider for the young person, saying, we're seeing some of these changes going on, we're not sure if this is a big deal that we should sort of go down talking to a mental health provider or not, help us sort of suss this out. Because the great thing is both school providers and primary care providers are used to working with a lot of young people. So they have a general sense of, is this sort of in a normal range of teenage moodiness that we just need to sort of weather for the next few years, or is it something more that we need to deal with? So I think really the school and our primary care providers are really good resources for us to be reaching out to.
Thank you. I appreciate you said talk to the kid, sort of sit down and have a discussion. It's okay to ask. It's okay to ask how you're feeling, and it's also okay to ask if you're having thoughts of self-harm or if you're having thoughts of killing yourself. That's okay to ask, and the research suggests that when we ask, we get answers and we can act and support the child. So I just want to emphasize that. Thank you. Courtney, down at the end. One of the things that comes up a lot is how do we cope, how do we manage stress? So we might have healthy coping strategies, we might have unhealthy coping strategies that could range from self-injury or substance use or multiple negative self-talk all the time. So I was wondering if you can define coping mechanisms and then help us understand the difference between healthy and unhealthy coping mechanisms.
Sure. Coping mechanisms, I think in the popular understanding, it's those things that we do to lessen the stress that we're experiencing in our lives. That's pretty well known. When we're thinking about teens in general, we're thinking about just exactly that. What are our kids able to do that is helping them manage these stressors that we've heard, especially here in a school setting where there's so much pressure and so much evaluation kind of happening all the time. A lot of time spent in adult-directed spaces and not child-directed spaces. So a lot of unhealthy coping mechanisms, some of the big ones that we recognize, especially from a mental health perspective, being substance use, withdrawal and isolation can be a really good way to kind of cut the noise of the world. And if you're anything like me, these last few years we've been kind of doing that. There's a lot of stress on a local level, and we've been kind of stepping back and isolating. But as Jason talked a bit about, that can be unhealthy. When you're alone with your problems, they tend to get bigger, not smaller. I see teens doing that a lot as an unhealthy way to manage stress that they're experiencing. Thinking about other things, unhealthy, certainly, letting go of responsibility, not keeping up with grades and things like that. Maybe getting in with friends that are in the right crowd and kind of engaging in risky behaviors. There's a lot of risky behaviors, especially just as an adolescent, that they're already attracted to. But if they're managing high levels of stress, it might be even easier to engage in those risky behaviors. And then healthy coping mechanisms are the things that we do that make our problems smaller, not bigger. So certainly, we hear a lot. I think a really important thing that a lot of us are adopting are mindfulness practices and learning how to kind of bring ourselves back into the present moment and avoid that panic that comes along with thinking too far in the future, or maybe the sadness that comes from thinking too far into the past. Reconnecting and having face-to-face human interactions are a really, really good way to cope with stress, as Molly talked about. When we talk with others and we connect with each other over what's going on and have honest, good conversations, that can help us manage stress in a really healthy way. When symptoms and behaviors are reaching clinical levels, certainly reaching out to a professional can be considered a coping mechanism, and our teams are going to need some help with that if they don't recognize those symptoms as being clinical or they don't know where to start. So it's important to have adults that are willing to listen and have honest conversations about what they observe in the teens. And then, things that maybe we take for granted, but going outside. I know it's getting cold and snowy out, and it may be easy to kind of think about going into our cocoons, but helping our kids find spaces that don't have roofs over their heads or screens in front of their faces is actually a really good place to start to just alleviate the normal stress of every day. But it certainly helps when stress has reached a toxic level as well. And I could go on and on. I think you get the picture here. But those are some of my big suggestions.
I'm glad you brought up the screens, because I imagine there's many people in the audience who have questions about that. We know social media and technology can be a wonderfully helpful support and distraction and coping strategy for all of us. But at what point does it become dangerous or high risk, and how do we talk to our teens about that? And feel free, because I know the panelists all have some good, healthy opinions for us on this.
So I can start. So I'll say, when our screens bring us more stress than they do enjoyment, and I think a lot of teens will start to recognize, at first they'll deny that it's a problem at all, but often once they start talking, they realize that the screen's constantly going, constantly pinging, there's always updates on social media. It actually brings about a lot of stress for them, and it brings about problems. So I actually talk a lot with young people about sort of healthy use of our phones, because we're going to have phones always in our pockets. I might have a pocket right now. But when we start noticing that stress level pick up from it, I think that's a big problem, and we can't really be able to put it down. Like, we have to be able to say at some points, screen time is over, and particularly for me, I think that's bedtime. So I do a lot of talking in the room. I think the most unpopular thing I talk about in my office is screen time in bed. And I do not like screens in the bed. I find that both, like, whatever we're doing on our screen is way more interesting than going to sleep. So whether it's like watching a Netflix show, or texting our friends, or playing a game, like our brain would much rather do that than sleep. And the light from our screen really makes it hard for our body to feel tired to go to sleep. So I get all of your permission to say there was this doctor I heard tonight who told me you can't have your phone in your bedroom with you tonight. You can blame me for that, that's fine. But I really talk to parents and kids a lot about that. How do we sort of have some screen time before that that's okay, but then when does that time end? And we really want to go to sleep. Having that screen there is such a distractor, but also can actually just make it hard to settle for bed. So that's a big problem where I see it happening too.
We have so many students that are coming to school tired. So having anxiety and being tired, those basic needs are so important. And a student who has anxiety, especially a social anxiety, they have this fear that they're going to be missing out on something. So they have a tendency to want to be constantly on the screen and finding out what's going on. And so the lesson is to continue to monitor what your son and daughter is doing with their screens, their phones, and their computers, because we really do need to monitor that so that they can be fully present in the classroom and managing their assignments and everything that they need to do to be successful.
Just to underscore that, as we talk with youth about healthy sexual development and taking care of their bodies, I think we just have open, honest dialogue that's developmentally appropriate at each stage on how to use our media and our social media and our screens. I don't think as scientists will ever get ahead of, or have the research that gets us ahead of the technology to know exactly what we have to do. So I think it's an important fluid dialogue to have with our youth to make sure they're safe, just as we would use any common sense parenting techniques as we're raising our children. Thank you for that. So I'd like to switch gears a little bit to Colleen and her work in the community, which is so important. But can you talk to us a bit about how, as a community, we support our neighbors, both our youth and their parents, who are dealing with anxiety and depression?
Well, I think the trend in the last decade or so has been very much for community collaborations, developing networks of support in our communities. I think in our modern world, we've kind of lost, I think, a lot with, both parents working or a single parent at home trying to deal with the stress of raising children. All kinds of just family life issues take us away from, I think, the connections that can actually help support not only us as parents, but our children too. So a lot of our work in the community is about finding the family's strengths, what they do well, what they identify as their family culture, and trying to build on those strengths. Interestingly, I think the isolation that sometimes happens, not just with social media and all that, but I think just in our fast-paced world, I think is pretty detrimental to us as adults and to a lot of kids. And I think the more opportunities that we can take to connect our kids to other adults, other positive adult role models, other activities in the community that are kind of life-affirming, are really, really important commitments that we should have for our children, so that even, I don't know, as a parent, I remember, a few of my kids, maybe they couldn't talk to us about something at some point, but we were always glad they had their old babysitter they could stop at, on the way home from school and talk to. So I think it's important to have other adults. The concept of neighborliness, we try to help parents find informal supports. Formal supports, of course, are very important, professional help when it's needed. But I think protective factors that kind of can stop a lot of negative stress from its tracks is that kind of integration in the community, having connections, and social engagement. So.
Thank you. Are there any other resources that are available in the communities that families and community members should know about if their kids or if they themselves are struggling with depression and anxiety, kind of beyond the medical world and the school world like we talked about? So frontline resources in Lakewood.
Yes, there are quite a few, but I think the Cuyahoga County actually has developed a network of support for families in every neighborhood, no matter where you live in Cuyahoga County. There's a neighborhood collaborative attached to you, the street you live on. Ours happens to be the Lakewood Collaborative, and we have a resource specialist because I think the county identified long ago too that families, if they just knew where to go when they need help, they could connect. So we do a lot of digging up and identifying resources. So we have a resource line that you can call, and on a larger level, the 211 is a number you can dial and pick up, and you can just simply tell them I'm looking for help for my child who seems to be depressed. They can give you actual connections to agencies or professional help that's available in your particular neighborhood.
And I just want to add too that the community mental health agencies in the area, you can self-refer. You don't have to wait for a referral from a pediatrician or anything like that. So in our area here, we have Outliers centers just down in Detroit. They provide a multitude of services in many different environments. I know here in Lakewood, City Schools, Belfair, and I think maybe Guidestone provides services as well, and that would just be another conversation to have with somebody that you have connections with at the school already to get pointed in those directions. If you did want to self-refer a team that you know to mental health services, don't feel barred from that. Feel very empowered that you can pick up the phone, dial the number from the website, and say these are the symptoms that you see, and ask for help. That's another avenue that can be very quick to seek the services you may need.
There is a hotline that you may know, but it's our suicide or crisis hotline, and I'll just give the number to you now. It's 1-800-273-TALK, which is 8255, 1-800-273-TALK. And you can call this number, a teen can call this number anytime, day and night, and there is a clinical provider on the other end who will pick up and is available. And countless youth have been able to use this number to help talk them down during a crisis, or have some blind person on the other end support them. And if there's an emergency and a crisis that needs to be addressed immediately, locally, then the clinical provider on the other end will facilitate that. So that's a very important number to have available. The other piece is that kids don't like to call on the phone very much anymore. I understand that. I actually prefer text as well. So there's a text line, and it's 741-741. I encourage you all to just try it. Make sure it works. I was really skeptical and didn't trust this for the first year, and I tested it out several times. And you just can text home or help or hope to this number, and you will get an automatic response, and then you'll get a live response saying what's going on, how can I help you? And then you can just say, I'm just looking for information, I'm testing this out, I just want to see what this was about, and they'll say, thank you, you're in the queue, we'll get back to you after this. So they're really triaging closely, and the youth can use this as well, and I've had many patients who've shared that it was very helpful for them. they didn't need to go to the hospital, but they needed kind of some immediate support right then. And that was a safe way to do it. So Courtney, I was wondering if you could kind of help us better understand how the community supports families who are overcoming adverse life experiences. Maybe Courtney and Colleen can address this, but feel free, all panelists, to chime in.
So how we can address different communities. I think a good step is what you're all doing here tonight, is showing up and being brave to sit in a room and have conversations about difficult topics. You know, it's interesting in my work, I always was aware that there was, you know, concerns with teen mental health, but I think it has now become the public's problem. And just thinking about what do we do, and I think it's bringing the problem out of the darkness and avoiding that isolation that comes with feeling like this is just my family's problem or just my child's problem. I think the wellspring of our happiness as humans is really one-on-one contact. So that's initially, you know, if you see somebody suffering, or if you're, you know, another parent who might just not know what's going on, share this information that you're hearing tonight, connect them with resources. It can be pretty scary if you just type in a Google search to see what's going on, and it's really nice to be sitting with people that can tell you that there's hope in the darkness and things can change. And also recognizing these problems, again, as community problems. You know, a lot of the drum that I beat when I go around is that we're all responsible for these things that are going on. And I think with adverse childhood experiences, the really daunting fact about that is 67% of our population has had at least one adverse childhood experience. Some of us in this room may have our own to think of. And when we don't talk about those things, or we spend our time thinking we're the only ones who have experienced that, it's lonely and it's hard to carry on. So I think remembering that you know, we are a village, and it does take a village to raise a child, especially a teenager. Oh my gosh, what a hard time to experience life, kind of in between childhood and adulthood. So coming together as a community, bringing people together to say we need to handle this together, and meeting in spaces like this, I think is a good place to start.
Again, I just think encouraging the concept of the network, the community, pulling together the school. In recent years, certainly here in Lakewood, our city and school partnership has been extraordinarily strong and growing all the time. It changes with the needs of in the community change as well. But I think the more that we can support any type of programming or policy decision-making that supports family life, supports our youth, is really important to identify and become part of if you can, and so that we keep that going and growing.
I want to mention, because we haven't really talked about statistics, and the statistics are out there. I think they're very scary, and maybe they're a little unnecessarily scary, but about 20% of youth struggle with a mental health problem, and so that's 1 out of 5. So if you're thinking of a classroom of 20, we were thinking about 4 kids. I did that right? 4 kids sitting there in the classroom who may be struggling at any one time with a mental health problem. Does anyone want to take a guess at the median age between onset of symptoms and diagnosis and treatment of a mental health problem in a youth? 1 year, 5 years, 10 years? Yeah, more than that. It's 10 years. So that could be a youth's entire life. So if you think of onset of symptoms and then finally getting recognition, diagnosis, and treatment. Remember, treatment is not just medicine. Jason's going to talk about that in a minute. But treatment is not just medicine. But getting to the diagnosis and an intervention, 10 years, that's a really long time. So we're trying to do a better job with identification, recognition. Sometimes labels can actually make things more comfortable. Sometimes labels can hurt. But in some situations, a label can really help us feel more comfortable and recognize what we're struggling with. And then I also want to emphasize that 37% of kids with a mental health problem and who are on an IEP don't graduate from high school. So that is the largest subgroup of youth that we deal with. That's a large population that doesn't graduate. So it's really important that we're talking about this now and that we're all talking across disciplines and across communities about this now. But all those things are pretty scary, and I feel like as parents, as community members, that can be very anxiety provoking. Most people get through adolescence quite well, unscathed, and actually develop tremendous resiliency and grit for the rest of their lives. And our job is to help them lean into the anxiety, lean into the challenges, and recognize that they can transition through very, very, very well. And we're there kind of as the co-pilots or the co-regulators. If you use that language, if they get off track, we can pick up the controls and steer the plane until they get back on track. And so that's sort of our job. Courtney's going to talk about resiliency and kind of brain development in a few minutes, but I just want to define resiliency. That's grit, if you've heard that word, and I've heard teachers say grit makes great. So you kind of develop grit when you do something hard, and you come out the other side stronger. And so we're trying to develop grit and resiliency in our youth, and we're modeling that as well. And we model that through recognizing that we can help kids face some of the challenges that they face. So I guess, Jason, we're going to transition a little to the medical piece. What can youth expect? So what can youth and parents expect when they reach out?
So as we talked about earlier, the first step of the process is often talking to someone through your frontline folks. That's often the school or the pediatrician. So obviously reaching out to those folks to get some support and feedback on next steps can be really useful. They may say at that point it's useful to meet with somebody in the mental health field. And that could be a whole bunch of different kinds of people you can meet with. And we all do very similar things, but have some differences in our sort of training and work. And so you may meet with a licensed counselor or a licensed social worker, doing assessments, helping with support, with psychotherapy, developing coping skills. Meet with a psychologist. A psychologist is a PhD level doctor who helps with doing psychological testing and assessments and doing psychotherapy. Maybe with a psychiatrist. So that's like Molly and myself, so we're MDs, so we're medically trained to do our assessments, help them with the diagnosis, and think about medications if that becomes part of the picture. So with any of us, or with whatever letters after our name, can help do some initial assessments and guide folks in the right direction. And depending on what the next steps may be, may sort of dictate who we end up meeting with. But there's a lot of us, sort of different people, sort of doing similar work. When you sort of you get referred to a mental health provider, I sort of think of it as, it feels very sort of scary. A lot of kids come into my office, I don't know what to expect. So when you come to see me, I have like one exam room and a long line of exam rooms, so I just sort of like, one of those happens to be a mental health room, so it's not sort of like a separate scary mental health corner of the building you're going down. It's just another appointment really. It's just usually a very long appointment. So usually the first visit can be maybe an hour. My first visits are an hour and a half. So we spend a lot of time together. And I ask probably like 1,000 or 2,000 questions. Not that much, but I do warn people from the start. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. I want to get a lot of information about what you're going through, what you're experiencing, where you're struggling, where you're succeeding, and how things are affecting your life and your family. So we spend a lot of time sort of delving into what's going on. Not like I have the kind of time to be able to really gather that sort of comprehensive history. We always spend some time talking all together, so usually just some time with whoever sort of comes to the appointment. I want to hear from everybody, but there'll always be some time we spend one-on-one with the young person, because I do want to hear what they have to say, so without any other grown-ups in the room. Sometimes it's different. So we do sort of have that time. A lot of what's said, we do sort of keep between the provider and the young person, but sort of if there's any concerns about safety, we talk about that all together, sort of as a team. Our team really consists of the young person, of the family, and then the provider. So I see us sort of all in a team together. So that first visit, we're gathering a lot of information, we're seeing what's going on, we're trying to come up with a diagnosis, if there's a diagnosis, that can lead us to a treatment plan, thinking about sort of primarily developing coping skills, developing supports, looking for areas where people are struggling. So if they're struggling at school, getting a sense of what the supports are like at school. Are there any additional supports that can be put in place there? Looking for if folks are struggling at home, and are there any sort of interventions behaviorally we can put in place in the home to help things go a bit more smoothly? Or is it sort of point we need to think about starting a medication? Or I think sort of at that point we need to use the combination of some skills and some medication to get things going. I often think of medication as sort of one tool, sort of in the toolbox of skills. And it should be probably one of the smaller tools there, but it can be a very helpful tool. And so we'll often think through if we need to go down that path, start talking to folks about what to expect there.
One other group that's not here at our table, that I think Colleen and maybe Courtney could speak to, and probably our school counselors who work closely with our school resource officer, are police officers and law enforcement. Can you talk about their skill set and how they're being trained and how they're helping youth who are struggling with mental health problems?
Yes, I know in Lakewood, the crisis intervention team is an effort by law enforcement to engage with the mental health practitioners to address a crisis with a family member in the community so that the situation can be de-escalated, but also that the help is given right at the point of crisis. So that Lakewood has, I can't remember how many, but a significant portion of the police officers are trained in crisis intervention methods, and I think on every shift here in Lakewood there is a response from a trained officer. And they do have a commitment, like I said, to responding to crises in the community with both family members and the person of interest, that they can recognize a mental health situation and link that person to a mental health resource.
Thank you. Dr. Winnicott was a pediatrician, and he talked about the theory of good enough parenting. And I think that was very empowering in a time where many people felt blamed for some challenges that might occur in their children. And I think this theory is really important to remember as we think about good enough. We may not always be experts. We may often feel very insecure and be facing challenges we've never faced before as we're supporting a youth, but we're all quite good enough to do it. And if we make mistakes, which I do all the time when I talk to youth, you can certainly offend, but they'll let you know, and that's good, because then you can apologize and say, whoops, I said that, I totally said it the wrong way. Let me try that again, sorry about that. I think recognizing that as the adults in the world, that we're good enough to address these challenges can be very anxiety reducing, and can help us strengthen and build that resiliency in our youth. A couple things I want to make sure you walk away with today are some tools, and you probably already do this, and you probably do this really well, but when you're talking with a youth who's really angry and is kind of getting mad at you and telling you how angry they are and might sometimes be taking it out on you, it's okay to validate that. And sometimes you can just validate by mirroring, you're really angry. Yeah, you really want me to, go away right now. Or you want to kill yourself. You are feeling like you don't want to be alive. So you validate, you hear it, you say it, you mirror it, but you can also own and take some authority and emphasize your ability to support in that moment by some language tricks at the end of those statements. You don't want to be alive right now. You hate me right now. And so you can then validate and also show your pillar of strength as you're working with that youth. So those are some of the things that Elaine Faber talks about in that article, how to talk so kids will listen and how to listen so kids will talk. But as we're kind of thinking about those concrete tools, one other thing, one question I'd like to ask before our final question is, what are some other tips, what are some other practices, habits that parents or family members or relatives or community members who care about youth can practice to establish or reestablish a connection with their teen to encourage an open dialogue?
favorite things to do with families that I work with, that are working with repairing and increasing cohesiveness in their relationship with their teens is how to spend time together. I think that is a time when maybe the allure of parenting has worn off a bit. You're tired, you raise them, they can feed themselves, dress themselves, go do your own thing, kiddo. And we sometimes forget that it's still really important to spend that time with our child or our teen, as they're not children any longer. And a really easy way to do that is just to take interest in what they're doing, even if it doesn't interest you at all. So I've encouraged plenty of parents to sit down at a movie, and if a kid's watching TV, and sit down and watch the show. And whether or not you love the show some interest, ask some questions, and let them be an expert on something. They spend a lot of time in adult-centered places where they're not the experts, and they're often being told what to think and who to be, and it's nice to have some space to do that. Really easy ways to gain some credit with teens is to see what they're already doing that's good and say something about it. Again, it's easy to be criticizing without even knowing it in a really fast-paced world, especially as a parent, especially as a working parent or somebody who's got lots on their plate. But a really easy way to do that is just to notice something they've done well. And teens want to do things well. They want to be thriving, good members of society, even though their dirty rooms don't always tell you that. But even if they carried their laundry down one day, it wasn't the whole week, but maybe it was just one day they carried it to the laundry room, that's a really great place to say, hey, thanks, you took so much off my load that day, thank you so much. And I'd be interested to see if it happens again, and with a little commitment and time, you'll see that some of that positive praise and validation actually turns into good behavior change. Because again, they want to be who we want them to be, they want to be helpful, and sometimes they need a bit of that nudge. But spending positive time is really important. Even just writing a list, having them write down some things that they'd like to do with you is a great place to start, kind of knowing where to connect.
Thank you. Do you ever recommend that parents sit down and play these very popular video games with their kids and teach themselves some new skills?
It's always good to know what they're exposed to, so observing and seeing can help you set appropriate parameters if need be. And if not, it's just a good place to kind of get inside your kiddo's head and say, hey, what do you like? How do you see the world? And how can I connect with you on that? We're adults, we've kind of stepped away from that adolescent frame of view. So it's nice every once in a while to be reminded that, life isn't as crazy, and we can sit down and kind of watch the video game and just get really engaged in it. And fake it till you make it. If you don't love it, don't let them know that. Ask questions, be curious. They will appreciate it, and they will show you some love on the back end, which can be really helpful on those stressful days.
I strongly agree. Yeah, I strongly agree. So we're almost at our last question. Are there any other specific concrete tips that you'd like to recommend for communicating with youth?
One of the things I notice is that students really have a tendency to want to have, a really quick answer or a quick fix to a problem or a situation that they're dealing with. And, we are really trying to teach them that it's okay to be uncertain as a part of life. And so allowing them to just sit with uncertainty is another way to build resiliency and inner strength, that I'm going to be okay if I don't have the exact answer right this moment in time. And just allowing them to work through that in a timely manner, or maybe not, because not all problems can be fixed in a timely manner. But that they're okay with having this problem and being able to talk about it is good enough for today.
That's great, to be able to be comfortable in our discomfort and to have that modeled. And the other thing you emphasized was the time you spend with the kid. And sometimes 5 minutes once a day is much, much better than a really fancy time that we're gonna go out and do something nice on a Saturday once a month. So 5 minutes once a day really adds up, and that's what we call the daily check-in, a very important piece of the communication. Final question, and I can see that maybe there's some questions generated out there in the audience.
Dr. Business, before you ask that,
Oh.
gather while you're asking. Is that okay?
Great.
Let's do that.
So
if you have your note cards, pull them up, please, and we will walk around, we'll gather them, we'll compile them together, and then we'll get them to the panel. So while we're doing that, we can continue our discussion up here, so there's that weird awkward time.
And questions are really fun, and it's okay, if a question's too hard, we will tell you it's too hard, and we'll just have to find the answer later on. And if we don't get to your question, we look forward to talking with you at another time. So, final question, and I think this goes to everybody, but maybe Courtney and Jason can start us off, is really understanding what is resilience and what do we need to know about the human brain and its development, and how do all these remarkable experiences of life affect us?
It's constantly growing and changing and growing neurons, cutting away neurons. There's always changes happening sort of through childhood and adolescence. So that means even though some bad things may have happened to people, it doesn't mean sort of like they're going to be hardwired to have problems later on in life. And we can take advantage of the constantly changing actual like cells of the brain sort of through childhood and adolescence to do some interventions like psychotherapy, like spending positive time together, like starting medicine, whatever it might be, to actually go in and affect sort of the biology of the brain, then be able to come out on the other end sort of in a sort of different space. So I think anything sort of positive that we can do along the way, even if sort of bad things have happened before, and we feel like, this kid's already gone through this trauma in the past. How can I sort of change that? I can't change what's happened before. And that's true, we can't change the past, but by sort of actively working now in the present, it actually can have future changes, both from just sort of learning coping skills, learning healthy ways to manage stress way, but also can sort of affect sort of the brain in long-lasting sort of biological ways as well. It's that combination of some biological changes in the brain, some psychological changes in how we deal with stress, some social changes in how we sort of interact with other people that can really sort of cause those positive outcomes later on.
And so it's a good thing that I know I have a time limit here, otherwise I'd spend all of tonight talking to you about early childhood development and how that truly sets the stage for everything that comes after. And it is so wonderful that our brains can change and we can develop resilience to bounce back from difficult moments in life. In fact, that's where some of the most incredible things happen in our lives, when we're able to turn the page on problems and make new out of what we've learned. But think about the first 3 years of life as the stage that's being set for the rest of life. There's the quote that the first 5 years have everything to do with how the next 80 turn out. When infants and toddlers are between the ages of 0 to 3, they are developing millions of brain connections every single second. They are learning machines, and everything that they take in is really important. So if we're thinking about that, thinking about how they're just learning machines, we want to make it certain that they're able to do that. And the easy, simple ways to do that we're already wired to do are to create loving, lasting, supportive relationships with our children. So hugs and kisses are really important. Touch is the first sense we develop while we're infants, and it's the one that we can communicate with them the most. So being attuned to our babies, knowing how to recognize what they need, helping develop trust by responding to their needs appropriately, help us set the stage for children that can bounce back from problems. So I just put that call out there, that early intervention. I think Molly mentioned that 10 years that symptoms can kind of develop before we actually get to a place of treating. The closer and more connected we are with our children when they're little, it cuts down the amount of time that it takes to engage. So I cannot stress that enough. Early childhood intervention is really truly how we ensure that when they're in their adolescent years that are already hard at best, they have the best coping skills, the best kind of resiliency and grit that's already there waiting for them to help them. So don't forget that. If you have little ones at home, hug them, squeeze them, have fun with them, play with them, and do that with your teens too. That's just as important, although they may not like it as much.
Thank you. And just to, you want to say, yeah, Colleen, thank you.
I just wanted to add that on the back table at the end of this evening, I have a list of 40 developmental assets from the Search Institute, and it's a list of the external and the internal building blocks that youth need in some form or fashion to develop healthy coping skills and to develop into a healthy adult life. So those will be back at the table, and they're easy to read and quick to take a look at sometimes, just to remind ourselves what we may need to be doing a little more of. So.
And as we think about development and this massive brain, and learning should be fun, there should be lots of joy and enthusiasm around learning. Sometimes when a kid presents with a mental health challenge or anxiety or aggression or behavioral disruption, sometimes it could be a learning problem that's really causing stress if they're in the school environment. So you don't want to overlook a learning challenge. I think that's important to remember. The other piece is as kids are, as our brains are developing and we're growing, it's not really just a slope. Sometimes it may be a stair step, and sometimes you could be plateaued for a period of time and feel like the child's never going to master or grow or struggling with the same problem, and then it could just change. And so we know that development is quite different for every child, that sometimes it's a slope and sometimes it's a staircase, and we have to be patient along the way because the brain is plastic and we have time. And I think time is a very wonderful part of youth and development. So thank you, yeah, Colleen.
I also think that instilling a sense of hope in children is important. So in your family, all of us in our families have stress. Something happens in the family, or the family is going through something over a time period. And I think part of developing positive problem-solving skills comes from being assured by the adults around you that every problem has a solution. The problem doesn't last forever. It's going to resolve. And kind of giving that sense of confidence and hope, I think, to kids at a young age and even teenagers, I think is very reassuring parenting techniques.
So thank you so much, panelists, for your time and preparation. And again, thank you for being here. We're going to start with the questions, and I've screened them, and I think they're very appropriate and very exciting. But if you feel like you need to leave during the talk, that's okay. Thank you for being here. So Jason, I'd like to start this question with you, and everyone else feel free to chime in. This is from a parent. My 17-year-old daughter does not always remember to take her medication, which is Prozac. What are some ways to help her remember? She hates me asking if she's taken it. When she seems more depressed, she doesn't like when I ask, have you taken your medicine? But I feel I see a difference when she has stopped taking it daily.
Mom, stop nagging me, I'm taking it. So I think that's great, because we all have trouble remembering to take medicine every day. That's not something that we're used to. So that's like not just our teenagers, like all of us. I always emphasize that when I'm talking to people about this. I for my doctor, take this antibiotic for 5 days. It's like, how do you remind yourself every day? So I think a big part is having to be part of our routine. So what kind of routine are we already having during our day that we can use as a reminder? So how do we build it in? So it's a medicine we take in the morning. Do we start associating the medicine with like breakfast? Do we sort of keep the bottle sort of next to the cereal box? So when we grab the cereal, we see the medicine there. Do we put a little note on the cereal box saying, don't forget to take your medicine? So do we put it next to our toothbrush? Or again, have sort of reminders. And we start like associating maybe eating the meal, maybe brushing our teeth, taking a shower, packing our backpack, whatever that might be. And I think reminders are key. So like I tell them all the time, I'm always writing things down. I like the to-do lists out little boxes that I can check off. So whatever sort of reminder system works. So maybe it's putting a post-it note sort of, on sort of the door, don't forget to take your medicine. I think the easiest one, back to phones, since we're all over our phone with us, is we can all ask Siri to remind us to take our medicine. So I tell people, set a reminder for yourself every day, have an alarm go off, whatever time you want you to take your medicine, and do not turn it off until you take it. Because it's so easy to say, okay, I'm gonna take it, and then we forget to actually do it. So keep like that alarm going until you walk to the pill bottle to take the medicine. So I think sort of building that routine in or having sort of our phone be our reminder can be really useful ways to cue us so we don't have to ask. Some folks will do things like sort of get the sort of 7-day-a-week sort of little pill box. And I think that's okay because we can actually put it in every day. And if they take the medicine, the pill won't be there. So you can sort of walk by, take a little look, and it's not there, and feel reassured they took the medicine and not have to worry about it. Or if medicine's still in there, sort of a gentle reminder because we know it wasn't taken. So that can either be a visual reminder than just the bottle, which we don't know if today's was taken or not. So I think the routine, the phones, and the pill boxes can be useful strategies.
Thank you. Can you also mention some safety issues very briefly about medications, and at what point do you lock up medications and what medications are most important to have secured?
Yeah, I think anytime we're concerned about somebody's safety, they might do something to harm themselves, using medicines in an unsafe way is a potentially common and dangerous way to try to hurt ourselves. So I do recommend, if we're concerned that people are talking about hurting themselves, their depression is really bad, if they've had any sort of suicidal thoughts or behaviors in the past, that we sort of enact a safety plan. And part of that is often around medications. So in those cases, I actually recommend that parents are in charge of the medications and and give out the pill each sort of morning or evening to the child, so that if things get to be really bad and the kid gets to an unsafe place, they won't have access to a lot of pills to use unsafely. And those pills can be anything. So if I'm talking to folks about having parents take control of medications, that's usually hiding them somewhere where the kid can't go and find them in the medicine cabinet, so hiding them somewhere in your bedroom. And that's from all the medications in the house. So that's the medications the kids are taking, the medications you're taking. That includes over-the-counter medicines, so Tylenol, Advil, Motrin. Those medicines can be unsafe and overdose. So I recommend, if we're at a point we're really concerned about someone's depression or safety, we take all the prescription over-the-counter medicine, just have a parent be in charge of those medicines, for a period of time, and sort of give the pill up. That's the other way of knowing you're taking medicines and giving it to you with the water and saying, take the medicine, and then wait to see that they take it.
Thank you. Courtney, Nina, and maybe Jason. This is about a parent of a 16-year-old. So if every time you broach the topic, the teen get irritated and want you to go away. Grades are down due to organizational issues and screen time. How do you talk to them about this? And how do you get a 16-year-old to cooperate and go to therapy? Hard questions. Good questions.
I say, if this is where we're already at, this is a place to do a little bit of relationship rescue and kind of reconnecting over something that isn't such a difficult issue for the 16-year-old. So this is where it's really important to take interest in what they're doing and spend time with them, because those fights usually happen when we're the ones directing the conversation and bringing up, hey, there's these problems, and none of us want to talk about our problems, especially with our parents, especially when we're teenagers. So finding ways in that are not directly related. With teens, you have to do a lot of rolling with resistance. So kind of what Molly was attributing to a little bit earlier, where we're recognizing what they're dealing with and we're not fighting against it. The more teens feel in control of what's happening to them, the more likely they are to go along with it. So oftentimes with kind of good rolling with the resistance and kind of just recognizing, yeah, you don't want to talk about this right now, or we're just calling a spade and saying, yeah, this is really hard and I don't want to be talking about it either, but what can we do so that you can get some relief? We both know that right now things aren't going well and there's some things we can do to feel better. And that may be kind of tapping into your creative skills of how do we introduce information to them. So we have lots of avenues, whether that's sending a link on Facebook to them about different resources, or recognizing other families or other children that are going through similar things, creating that universality that, because adolescence is already life on a stage, you feel like everything is only happening to you and no one else in the world knows suffering the way that you do. And that may be true. I think we all have our stories of adolescence that we very much felt that in a very real way. But creating some universality and letting them know that there's other kids in that same situation going through the same kinds of things that can help soften their approach to potentially seeking help. But in whatever way we can, helping them to feel empowered that it's their choice and not being forced or thrust upon them is a really good place to start. And that starts with spending positive time with them, even if it's that daily check-in 5 minutes a day. And that also gives you good observational data if you are going to talk with a professional, so we can have accurate diagnosis, so that label can actually be helpful to make sure that we have appropriate treatment and we can have recovery be speedy and not something that we spend too long trying to do, which is important as well.
I love that, sending a text message or an article on Facebook, although you don't really use Facebook, but somewhere in Snapchat, to recognize. And it's so much fun to talk to you through memes. I don't know if you guys use that or not, or in text language. Kids love that. And so sharing, here's a pack of gum, and by the way, I found this article, or here's a cute little cartoon that I found in, somewhere on Snapchat that I thought you might find interesting, or here's a cup of tea, you want to sit with me, and then I just found this thing we could talk about, without necessarily having to delve too far into it. Wonderful ways to connect. Any other comments on that question?
Just sometimes it's a timing issue too, because I know for all of us, sometimes you just don't feel like talking at a certain time of the day or whatever, and sometimes planning ahead gives everybody in the conversation a little bit of control. Well, if you don't feel like talking about it now, how about if we talk, later this evening or tomorrow morning? It's sometimes a good thing to just keep in mind about the time.
the timing.
Not everyone wants to sit around the table and talk about feelings, so figuring out like, stuff elements that works. We're gonna sit around at dinner, we're gonna talk about day and how we're feeling, and that's awesome. For some people, it's like not gonna work. And so it's doing it or doing other activities. So we're all sort of sitting around the couch, we're all on our screens, we're all doing whatever, and then sort of starting that conversation. In some ways, while they're distracted by something else, so they can sort of feel like that sort of is not the only thing they're putting their attention to. You can sometimes sort of sneak in sort of that way. We're utilizing other trusted adults. So sometimes it's not going to be the parent they want to talk to at all. And so are there anybody else who is sort of trusted adults in their lives? I think aunts and uncles can be really useful in these situations. People who know the kid but are not the parent, who can sometimes sort of be useful in sort of broaching the topic. Are there any other sort of mentors or folks that they work with, other coaches, other teachers, or there can be other adults that can sometimes bring it up and then sort of provide you some feedback, but that may seem less threatening to the young person in terms of it not sort of being the parent. And the other part of it, I think, is we just think there's an incentive, right? Because I think, particularly the question around therapy, like we can put the kid in the car and drive to therapy, it's going to be a waste of everyone's time, they're not going to talk, they're just going to talk about TV shows, and it's not going to get anywhere. So it's really feeling like, is there a reason why we're asking kids to do these things? We're asking them why to talk to us, why to talk to a doctor, or to a therapist. So it's getting a sense for your child, like, what is it that they will get out of this? And aside from like coping skills and things that we know, that's not going to fly to them. So thinking about, you know, in what ways are the symptoms actually affecting them now, and saying, you know, that potentially by addressing this, you know, you'll do better in class, which will help you, whatever your goal is. So I'm often asking, like, it's, you know, what is your goal like in 5 years? Like right now, who cares if you fail that test? But if you've got a goal to get to college, you've got a goal to go to art school, you've got a goal to get a good job, whatever it is, how can sort of what we're doing now help us achieve that goal? So what's our incentive for actually doing these things? And sometimes the incentive isn't just sort of like self-motivation. It's like, well, if we can sort of all do what we're going to do this week, then we're going to do something fun this weekend. I often bring up the fact that most times, like my motivation to go to work is I do good work, I like to help people. There are some days because I'm going to get a paycheck. And so sometimes we all have to have external motivations to get us to do things we always want to do. So thinking through what are the motivations going to be for your child to help them sort of see that what we're asking them to do actually help them achieve their goals as well.
I just wanted maybe to add another, this is a place where it's a really helpful spot to take off a parent hat and approach your teen as psychological equals. So reducing a bit of that power differential of, well, if you're not going to go, I'm going to make you anyway. I think that kind of pumps up the resistance that may be met with someone who is concerned that they're going to have to talk about things that scare them with other people they don't know, which is what therapy starts out as. It certainly changes and is wonderful after that. But and what I mean by psychological equals is not that we're there spouting all the reasons why therapy would be good or why taking medicine is good, but it's really empathizing and connecting with whatever the experiences may be. And it doesn't necessarily have to be feelings, but it's just validating that they're having a hard time and that you totally understand why they may not want to do this. And then maybe sliding in the comment or two about what could be helpful and connecting with what would be better for them if they went, and actually letting them do more of the talking if they're willing in that moment as well. Letting them identify why it's good, not lecturing at them why it would be helpful. So psychological equals, that's another good place for parent-teen negotiations, which is a strategy that can be helpful and introduced to you in therapy that can be helpful with these conversations.
Psychological equals, I like that.
I also think it's like those small steps, and I'm always emphasizing to the kids, you want to surround yourself with people that are going to be helpful. And I know those conversations are very difficult to have, but it's important that you are having those, and that if you can kind of take them where they are, and anything you can get into, you know, making those suggestions that, you know, the school is there to help support, and, you know, the organizational part's tough, you know, it takes time, it's those small steps to be celebrated.
And sometimes talking to, sometimes eye contact can be too intense. Sometimes it can be intimidating, sometimes it can throw you up. And particularly for male teens, that can be very uncomfortable. The research has showed that. So some parents have found that driving in the car and not having that direct eye contact, going for a walk, can be a better way to just engage. Remember, it's not our agenda, it's the child's agenda. Our agenda, when we're setting limits and disciplining, getting to school, that's an agenda we have. But when it's there for nurturing and for understanding, it's not our agenda, and we don't have to solve problems. And you said, talk less, listen more. And I love the example of the fact we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. I think of that a lot when I start going too much. So this is a question, thank you for all those wonderful answers. I hope that was helpful. This is a question for Nina and Roberta at the school. So how does the school train their teachers to work with children experiencing mental illness? I think this is a great question.
Been nice having the Cleveland Clinic come in and being there as a resource along with our welfare people and then even the counselors. And every once in a while, there's those different workshops that are out there that they're able to attend and, a lot of sharing. Especially, I think it was helpful when we were holding those meetings, where the teachers could drop in and talk about different.
Right, the teachers have the teachers know the children. I mean, they with your kids, 8 hours a day. They know the kids, and sometimes they might feel that they don't have the skill set to address a mental health challenge, but they certainly have a skill set, and sometimes they need to be empowered and recognize that a lot of what they're doing is very important and the right thing to do for a child with a mental health problem. So there's something called youth mental health first aid. You may have heard this. You can all be trained in youth mental health first aid. In fact, there are free trainings throughout our county. It's a 7-hour training, but at the end you leave and you're a youth mental health first aider, and you sort of are like someone who can provide first aid for a medical condition, but you can provide first aid for a mental health problem. And it's a wonderful training, and so a lot of the teachers at Lakewood, the counselors, have been through this training. I'm a certified trainer, and I absolutely love this program. I think it's extremely valuable in the hospitals. We should all be trained, and certainly in the community. So that's something else that Lakewood is doing. Okay. This is a question for Courtney, and everybody else too. Is it common or uncommon for parents and caregivers of kids experiencing anxiety to be experiencing anxiety themselves? I think this is a great question.
Absolutely. I was just having a conversation that our kids are a reflection of how our society is doing. I'm sure many people in this room are familiar with the phrase Kasirian and Gira, which is from an African tribe, which means, and this is how they greet each other all the time, and they say, how are the children? And the answer should be the children are well, and if they're not, it's a reflection of what's going on in the world around them, which is the adult-centered world. And parenting already is at that top, it's like one of the top 3 threats to mental wellness, because it can be so busy and so demanding of you to take care of someone else's life fully for a very long time. So it is very common, and oftentimes before we start working on a child's mental health, we want to take a look at the adults in their life and see if those adults are taking good care of themselves. And if they're not, we know that modeling is one of the most important forms of teaching that we have as parents, being the most influential, important people in our children's lives. So yes, it is very common, and we spend a lot of time, and sometimes it may happen too that parents are often taking their kids to seek services in place of doing so for themselves. So it is a nice check sometimes to see that, if we're seeing our kids under a lot of weight and a lot of pressure and stress, to kind of take a look at what our load looks like and how we're doing. In my world as a mental health practitioner, compassion, fatigue, vicarious trauma are real threats to my own well-being, and I find that my work is tricky and really difficult if I haven't checked that or if I don't have a very solid self-care plan. So it is very important to pay attention to that. I appreciate that question being asked, and it's often overlooked. So if it's not a conversation that you're comfortable having on your own, you can always talk with the person that you're taking your child to, and they'll help refer you to appropriate resources for adults, depending on where you're at, what type of provider you can seek. Lakewood has a lot of really strong private practice counselors here in the local area that you can have access to. Oftentimes it's kind of hard to know who they are, but working with your insurance agent, or whatever your type of insurance is, they can connect you with people that are in your network. A lot of Practitioners have web pages so you can see how they practice, what their philosophies on practicing are. But yes, absolutely, it's common. It's tricky to raise a kid. It's fun, it's rewarding, it's the most important work that some of us will ever be engaged in. But it can take a toll, and we must take care of ourselves first. We cannot pour from an empty cup. I've told myself that much over the last year, and I take that seriously as a mental health practitioner, and I want parents and caregivers and any youth-facing person to really take that to heart. So take care of yourselves.
Can you just give very briefly, what are the nuts and bolts of family therapy and what's different about family therapy?
Sure. The briefest answer to that is the client in a family therapy situation is the family. So no one single person is there in the hot seat. It's the system of the family. And the treatment modality approaches the dynamics of the family as the place for growth. So we're improving dynamics, working along with each other. And again, no one single person is the problem. It's the system and how the system functions, and that's what we're looking at, which differs from individual therapy. Especially with children and youth, you should absolutely be involved in your child's therapy, but as Jason talked about a bit, there's more one-on-one time with the youth, but you should always, as a parent or a caregiver, be engaged in your child's services, and if you ever feel like you're not, then you're not getting the best possible care. Certainly, treating a child, you must treat the family, but there are subtle differences if we're doing family therapy versus individual.
Right, thank you. Nina, this is a question for you. How do we help kids along when the counselors are made aware of the child's anxiety, such as if they're refusing to go to school? How do you help the child? What do you advise the parents to do? So how do we help? So kids with school avoidance and anxiety, refusing to go to school, what do you do? What do you do as the counselor? And then how do you advise parents to help these kids who are struggling with getting to school?
Well, it's a very common issue that we deal with, not only with 9th graders, but 9th through 12th graders. And the first thing that we do is we try to identify what's causing the anxiety. And that could be a plethora of reasons. It could be that they're a new student and they're feeling overwhelmed by the size of the school, believe it or not. That has happened. Just the environment in and of itself can be overwhelming for many students. We also have a lot of students that have anxiety because there's been a family change, a loss, they might be grieving. Students have anxiety coming to school because they're afraid that of their classes, the content that they're dealing with, they're feeling very overwhelmed. So the first thing we do is we try to identify what it is, and the second thing we do is get the kid here ASAP. Because we don't want to enforce the fact that they're staying home and that that's okay. And so this is where it gets a little bit tricky, and we've had a lot of different ways that we deal with getting the students to school. The main thing is to let the student know that they are coming into a safe environment and they're going to be met with people who care about them and want to see them succeed in school. So whether that's coming into my office first, and us having a dialogue, building that rapport with the student. Sometimes we do things where we'll have a reduced schedule, not to necessarily enforce that they aren't going to be going a full schedule, but just to let them kind of get their feet wet. And I'm talking extreme anxiety, where they're simply refusing to come to school. So sometimes it's, they're going to do a partial day, they're going to have meeting with some identified teachers that are going to kind of take them under their wing. We have situations where they will be meeting with check-in, check-out with a certain teacher, and a lot of other ways that we can help the student try to build a consistent day every day.
I think that, it's very individualized, each of the cases, and just always trying to find those things and build on those small successes and that.
I just want to say that, I've been thinking a lot about what everybody's been saying, and, the fact is that we have to be the parents, and we have to set some guidelines for the students, because if those guidelines aren't there, or the expectations aren't there, down the line, which the teenager can't anticipate, that the problems are going to become larger and the anxiety will become bigger. The more school that they miss, the larger they're going to kind of dig themselves into a hole. So even if they come to school and they're sitting periods 1 through 4 in the guidance office in a supportive room and they're on Google Classroom working by themselves, they are getting their positive reinforcement that being in school is a safe place and that they can handle that. And we just kind of build day by day, getting them to go to every single class every day.
Thank you for all those answers, and thank you for being here and for caring so much about the wellness of our youth, their physical health, their mental health, their academic health. It's all part of the same thing to build a resilient and strong population and individual. So thank you for being here. Feel free to come up and ask questions at the end. And thank you, Lakewood Alive.
Can we get a round of applause for these folks?